Hi guys, we're going to be solving quadratic equations by factoring. We spent some time last few days factoring, and now we're going to use those skills to help solve equations. That's pretty much what algebra is. You learn certain skills, in other words, you can use those skills to solve some equations and do things like that. So here we go. Okay, they're all going to be quadratic. Quadratic means they all have x squareds. That's how you know it's a quadratic. And we're going to factor today is how we're going to solve them. And to be honest, anytime you can factor a quadratic equation, it's the quickest way. You can't always factor them, but when you can, it's the quickest. So what I'm going to do, every time you start to solve these, you need one side equal to 0. And I always want my x squared to be positive if I possibly can. So I'm going to move that 7x to the other side, make it x squared minus 7x. And we didn't factor a whole lot like this, but remember, when you start to factor, you always want to do GCF first. So I'm going to take out an x, because they both have an x. Leaves an x minus 7. And all you do here to find your answer is whatever makes each factor 0, that's your answer, because it says x times x minus 7 is 0. So one of those has to be 0. So to make the parentheses 0, you would put a 7 in there, so that's one solution. And to make this term out here 0, you would just put a 0 in for x. So you get x is 7 and 0. Those are your two solutions, all there is to it. So you factor and just set each factor equal to 0. The second one here, I'm looking for factors of negative 24 that will give me negative 5. And I'm thinking, okay, it's x minus 8 and x plus 3. Now don't just stop there. Don't be so happy you factor that you forget to put your solutions. Solutions, remember, whatever makes your parentheses equal 0, your factors equal 0. So 8 would make the first parentheses equal 0, and negative 3 would make the second parentheses equal 0. And there you have it, 8 and negative 3. All right, a couple more here. Don't forget how to all your factoring methods. This looks like a difference of squares. I already have one side equal to 0, which is pretty nice. So I'm going to just say x plus 11, x minus 11, because 11 is the square root of 121. So my two solutions, negative 11, positive 11, because that's what makes the parentheses or each factor equal 0. All there is to this. Okay, now the next one looks a little more complicated, but I think you're going to find out when we start working it. It's not that big a deal. What I'm going to do first is move the 2k squared over. Make it 1k squared. Remember, I want one side equals 0, so I'm going to move the 11k over, which makes it minus 11k, which makes it minus 9k. And then I'm going to factor. Once you get it equal to 0, you're going to factor. So I'm looking for GCF again, which is k. That leaves a k minus 9. And I have k is 0 because of that k out there, and a 9 because of the parentheses. So k is 0 or 9. Now, I got one more to show you on the next slide, but I don't want you to lose sight of all the kind of factoring we did. Don't forget slide, divide, slide. That's probably going to come into play tomorrow. GCF, difference of squares, just be prepared for any of the factoring we did last week. It's hard to show all of those on one little video, but, be ready to see any of those tomorrow. Okay, last thing. It says find the zeros of the function. Now, this is just different terminology for the same thing. Zeros of a function means where does the function equal 0? What numbers for x make the f of x equal 0? And I want you to think all the time that f of x is just a different notation for y, because that's really all it is. It's just a different notation for the same thing you were doing. So to find the zeros, I'm actually going to make this side equal 0 just like we did, because that's, what makes it 0? Well, let's take this side over here and factor it. I need factors of negative 18. That would give me positive 7. So I'm thinking, okay, that's plus 9 and minus 2. So what are my two zeros? My zeros are going to be whatever makes the same thing. Whatever makes the parentheses 0. Negative 9, positive 2. Guys, that's it. All right, so I do want you to get used to reading that kind of terminology. Those zeros means solutions, means x-intercepts. All these things mean the same thing. So when you see this terminology, find the zeros of the function, it's basically asking you to solve the equation that's there, because zeros are really roots or solutions. All right, I'll see you tomorrow. We'll work on these things. Be ready to factor some more. A lot of factoring lately, and I'll see you then.